Welcome to back to Redhead Rewatch. I'm joined today with my brother-in-law, Jonathan Rodriguez. Jonathan is an avid TV goer, film, directing, cinematography. He screenwrites. He does it all. So we're happy to have him pop in on the podcast today. We're going to be talking about episode 4 of One Tree Hill season 1, air date 10/14/2003, titled Crash Into Me. The breakdown of this episode: Haley convinces Lucas to go with the team to an after party at Nathan's beach house in the hopes that the guys will become closer. When Lucas sees the wealth that was denied him, he finally confronts his mother about why she let Dan ignore them. Meanwhile, when Nathan's mom returns home to find a very angry son, she turns to Karen for advice. I really love this episode. We get introduced to Deb, which is Nathan's mom. And
Yep.
Jonathan, you've watched One Tree Hill before, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you seen every episode before, or?
Yes, I saw it. I binged it back when binging
Oh,
started.
okay.
And it was something that was always in the back of my mind, but never rewatched. And now that we're rewatching all these episodes, it's kind of back in my mind and it's fresh in my mind. So it's really exciting to like have a different perspective now as a full adult than when I was like watching for the first time. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting to see that perspective shift.
Yeah. And we talked about that too, me, Jillian, and Bun, because especially for us, like we watched it when it was still on TV live.
Okay.
The last season aired me and Alex Bunn's senior year of high school.
Okay.
So it's really interesting to go from watching it at like 14, 15, 16, like to 18, and then like watching it now as we
Yeah.
can relate more to the parents and like kind of see like you're not just zoomed in and like honed in on the kid's perspective and like
Yeah.
being an emo teen and like, you know, and just in general how society has changed and like culture has changed um in every aspect. You go back, a lot of these shows you go back and watch, and there's always some sort of like, I can't believe that they did that, they showed that,
Yeah.
they put it out there and like that was on a TV show. So it is really fun and interesting to watch, and I think that this was kind of the last stretch of the innocence of TV, of shows, of teen shows, um, and still recording everything on film, and still
Yeah.
like it just has a different vibe than anything that's made
Yeah.
currently.
Well, well, the late '90s, early 2000s was kind of that point where TV producers and executives were able to kind of say, "Hey, teens do have these type of emotions. Let's actually make a show about it and like have real situations that teenagers were going through at the moment." And parents were kind of oblivious to it. And then I think that's why these type of shows resonated so much with viewers, because they were watching something that they were also going through. And before that point, nobody was really talking about it or even showing it on TV. So I think that's why these shows were very popular, and you were able to see characters that you could relate with on TV and be like, "Oh yeah, I went through that," or "I have experienced that," or "I have a friend that is going through that situation," and seeing it play out it's really interesting how they just put it on TV and viewers were just plastered to the TV, just glued.
Yeah. And I think too, shows similar to One Tree Hill in the early 2000s and shows like that that are about relationships, people, feelings. Um, it's shows that like the whole family can sit down and watch.
Yeah,
It's not like Euphoria where like
yeah,
I'm not going to sit down comfortably and watch that with my parents. Or if I'm a parent and have kids, I'm not going to sit down and comfortably watch that with my kids.
yeah,
Um, Whereas, yes, there's drama and there's certain things in the show, relationship wise and whatnot. But it helps to start a good dialogue with parents or kids or um, because a lot of these conversations are parents are uncomfortable to have them. They don't know how to
Yeah.
start. And if they're watching it, they could be like, hey, do you have like if this happens to you or this situation or whatever. Um, so I think it's also something like that. And like on the Drama Queens podcast, the girls have talked about mothers and parents who have come up to them and said, I watched this with my daughter and it, when she was a teenager and it helped, start those conversations and facilitate that and um things like that. And then on the flip side of it, even though almost everybody's parents in One Tree Hill are not around,
Yeah.
miraculously, you do get, parents like Karen and Keith, who are involved throughout the whole thing and in Lucas's life always.
Yeah.
Um, who have like there's really great Karen and Lucas scenes throughout the whole thing, that are really nice, good communicative, moments that I think is really nice to show
Yeah.
between, parent and teen. And I think, adding in the sports element brings, the guys more into it, and all of that. But yeah, it also just that time in general was just a simpler time, you
Yeah.
know, clothing and makeup and like all that. It was just such a more simpler time of life, that I think everybody misses as
Yeah.
well, you
it,
know?
it's it, it's one of those things where like it is a simpler time, but when you were that age and you were the age of the characters on the show, everything always feels heightened. So
Mm-hmm.
simpler problems that as an adult you're like, oh, this is a simple fix, or we can manage it in an easier way. It's always heightened, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that you can really capture in the show. There's many moments and situations that you look back and you're like, why did they handle it that way? It could have been such a simpler conversation, or it was a misunderstanding, or just let's talk about why you feel the way that you feel about this certain interaction. And it could have been
Mm-hmm.
really resolved, but the fact that they feel like their point of view is so strong, it's hard to have that conversation and kind of see through these moments.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Like when you're a teen through middle school and high school, everything seems like the end of the world. And you're just so like emo and in your feels. And that was one of the things that like initially, attracted me to One Tree Hill. Like, especially like eighth, ninth, 10th grade, like it just, the things that made me cry, the things that made me, the relationships that I loved and the characters that I loved. It just helps you feel related and like even though it's dramatized and heightened, like in your life, you feel like those situations are as well.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so let's dive into talking about the actual episode.
Perfect.
Um, so I thought that I really love in this episode, over the next few episodes, they really dive into how the situation happened with Karen and Dan and
Yeah.
Deb. And we really start to get more backstory on that. With the backstory, I still think it's a little bit hard to believe. And like I know it's a show and like, you
Yeah.
gotta keep the drama. But like, and we had talked about this in earlier episodes, like me and Jillian and Bun, like it just they live in a small town.
Hmm.
Yet not until Lucas started playing basketball when he was 16 did any of this come about. Like Deb even says, I barely talked to Karen, like I never had a conversation with her, and like all these things, like it just is like wild to me that in this small town, this was never a problem. It was never discussed, like it was never talked about, it was never made a big deal.
Yeah, to me, it is believable in a way, especially in small towns. I think about myself. There's people that I haven't run into in years, and you could think, well, this is a small town too. Why
Mm-hmm.
haven't I ran into them anywhere? So it's I could see how it's believable. There's places that I don't frequent, so Karen's
Mm-hmm.
coffee shop is not maybe a place that Deb
Yeah.
might even want to run into because there is
Mm-hmm.
that tension. So maybe it's like a type
They
of
just
thing
all
that
kind of ignored
out
it.
of sight, out of mind type of situation.
Yeah.
So and Dan is a very strong-willed person, and I feel like he's the type of person that can tell you what you want to hear. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like up to that point of this episode, Karen was the person that she believed in the good heart that her husband and her son had.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan's always telling her, "Oh, he's such a good kid. He's so responsible." So by her being the parent that was traveling 10 days out of the month, she
Mm-hmm.
only saw what kind of what they wanted her to see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do believe that this whole time maybe Deb was a little naive and oblivious to the situation that Dan and Nathan were having at home, and also the situation that was happening or that had happened between Karen and Dan. Um, I feel like it's really hard to believe the aspect of her not at least having a small idea that he was Dan's son, but small towns keep big secrets, so it
Yeah.
wouldn't surprise me that there was also kind of like is it, is he not?
Yeah. Well, and I think too with I mean the Deb and Karen and their relationship starts to form in this episode.
Yeah,
And I really love how it's depicted, especially in that time, to have two women in this situation and not have them at any point be catty or negative or rude or mean, like to really just understand each other, I think
yeah,
is one of the things that I really love. I also think it's really funny that Deb is home for like all of 5 seconds and she knows everything that's going on with Nathan, like more than Dan even does, who
yeah.
spends every second every day with him, you know?
I think Dan knew from like
I think Dan knew. I think Dan's just so narcissistic that he doesn't care.
yeah,
Like, he truly doesn't care about anybody but himself. And I think parents like that, similar to Dan, in the status and, you know, the capacity that he is. I think they're always the ones who are like, my kids are perfect. My kids are the best. They're fine. They're great. Like nobody's
yeah,
perfect, fine and great, especially as a teen. Like,
yeah.
you know,
I,
and I just thought it was really funny how Deb came in and 5 seconds in, she's like, Nathan is unhappy. This situation needs to change. Like, this is not okay, you know?
yeah, I believed it because it was a lot of it felt like mom intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Like it felt like she could tell that there was something wrong. And I feel like the whole Dan situation is more like he's my kid and I've been racing him. And if I'm great, there's no reason for him not to be great. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that leads a lot into Nathan's view of basketball. He
Mm-hmm.
he's doing this all for his dad, and it's not necessarily that he doesn't enjoy basketball, but it's all to appease his dad's feelings about still having this basketball life.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also really, and over the next few episodes too, is when, you know, Nathan questions that and is like, why am I doing it? Do I want to still do it? And, you know, all of that. Um, and I think that I believe it's the next episode that is the family dinner, right? Oh
The
no, the
next
next
episode, I think,
one
is the father
is
the
the father
father
son,
son
right?
game. Yeah,
Um, but it's also wild to me, like how, I mean, I guess not, because Dan's like the epitome of a narcissist, and
yeah,
like they're really good at projecting everything and throwing everything back so that nothing hits them, nobody's mad at, like, you know, all the
yeah,
things. Um, but just his and like everything when Deb's like, oh, like how is he? And he just starts like, oh, well, he's doing this in sports and this stat and this stat. And she's like, no, but like, how is he? Like,
yeah,
as a person, as a teenager, as a kid, like, is he doing okay? And then he's like, oh, well, Whitey's really been on him about basketball. And she's like, no, like, I don't care about basketball. Like,
Yeah.
how is he as a kid? And like, he has no answer,
Well, there was even at one point in the episode where she's kind of like, when she realizes that things aren't right, he basically threw it on her, and he's like, "Well, you're
Mm-hmm.
not here, and you travel a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
your work comes first before us." And it was like, she's like, "I work hard to make it work,"
Mm-hmm.
and he just kept throwing everything at her in that moment when he felt confronted about the
Mm-hmm.
situation. So it was a little infuriating because it's like
Mm-hmm.
you see
And
it
she
happen.
wasn't even
You're
like,
just
you're wrong or anything. It's, there's something needs to change. Like, we need to help our
yeah
son. And he's like, well, it's your fault. If
yeah
anything's wrong, it's your fault. It's not my fault. Like, you know. Um, and then as soon as she's like, okay, I won't, I won't travel and this and that, he's like,
yeah
oh, well, no, no, don't stay home. Like, you know. Um, but yeah, I also just Barbara Allen Wood, who is the actress who plays Deb.
yeah
I love her so much and everything she brought to the character. I feel like it could have really easily been a character that people did not like, and could have come off as like a bitchy character or like, the white privileged suburban
yeah
mom. And she just brought such a warmth to Deb, and especially because we're introduced to Karen first, right? Lucas is
yeah
kind of the main character of the show, at this point. And, we kind of have their point of view of the situation. So, especially like having Deb come in, 4 episodes in, it could have been really easy to just hate Deb.
yeah
And I think she does a really beautiful job of just bringing that like warmth and likability to Deb. And her and Moira, who played Karen, the two of them too have great
yeah.
chemistry. And whenever they have scenes together, it's really great. And that, progresses on and on and on. But I really just overall, I really love
Yeah.
Barbara Allen Wood, and I think she does a really great job,
I think she did a really
with
good
Deb.
job. It was I remember the first time that I watched the show and her character was introduced, and in my head I already had an idea of who she was gonna be based on who Dan and Nathan are. And I
Mm-hmm.
just picture her being like, well, my husband and my kid are perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that she wasn't that character, I found it so refreshing. And it was able to give me a perspective that everything that Nathan is wrong with Nathan, or he does wrong, or he is the way he is all because of Dan. It's not because of her being away, it's because Dan is such a strong presence in his life that everything that's wrong with Dan bleeds into Nathan.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's interesting how quickly I feel like it becomes you being like, why is this great woman with Dan?
Yeah.
Like how, and I get, she got pregnant young, but like how was she ever with him?
But
Like
it's a
even
point that
dating
they
him,
make in the episode. Yeah, it's a point that they make in the episode as well, because when they're at the party and they see the video, she Peyton makes a conversation with Brooke about, it's crazy to think that she allowed him,
Mm-hmm.
like Karen allowed Dan to treat her this way, and then she basically threw it in her face. She's like, "Are you just afraid that you're Karen in this situation?" Basically,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really like, "Oh shoot, yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
why are all these great women letting men treat
Mm-hmm.
them the way that they want, like the way that they don't want to be treated, just
Mm-hmm.
for the fact that maybe that's what they think they it needs to happen, or maybe that's what they were told from a young age."
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really
Well, and I think,
interesting way to show that.
like you said earlier too, I think that, Dan has a really good way of drawing people in. And especially, a lot of his initial issues that are on the surface level as an adult are because of like his regrets and all of that with
Mm-hmm.
basketball. So if you take that away, if you go back to when he was younger and he didn't have all of that built up regret and resentment and all that stuff, he just had dreams and he was just the
Yeah,
best and he was the greatest. I'm sure that was probably when he was at the best as
yeah,
a person in his life. And that's when he was with Karen, onto Deb. And started spiraling from there. But I'm sure that that's when he was probably at his best. We do kind of see the glimpses, of Dan as a good guy. And I mean, it always gets overshadowed by him
Yeah.
being a narcissist. But,
Yeah.
I'm sure, and especially like you're young, you're in high school, like most likely that was Karen's first boyfriend. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was probably kind of a rug pull for her of like, oh, when push came to shove, like you were like, no, bye, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But then it's like you go with Deb, and then it's like, well, I can't abandon two sons, so I guess I'll just the second one I'll just stay with. Like
Yeah.
it's really a wild, crazy situation. So then, talking about Peyton and like the party, I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on the character Peyton.
So it's hard for me to like feel or have views on a character, especially Peyton. So since I'm not a girl, I don't know how that angst differs from male. Uh, I can see Nathan and I can see Lucas and I can kind of see parts of me as a teenager because even them being so different, there's
Mm-hmm.
always qualities that like as a young teenager you can kind of relate and be like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe it wasn't so good at math, or oh yeah, maybe like I didn't have the best home life. um but like it's really weird to see Haley, Peyton, Brooke, and they're also different from each other's, yet they kind of feel like they're going through the same
Mm-hmm.
situation. So it's really hard to like sometimes look at them and be like, okay, like I can, it's not that I don't feel for them, but I can't say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I know exactly what she's going through. So
Yeah.
it's hard for me to understand. That's why as you keep watching the show and they give you a little bit more of explanation on their background, like Peyton doesn't want to really be a cheerleader. She kind of is doing it for just the fact that she thinks she has to do it. But you
Mm-hmm.
can see that Brooke is really into cheerleading, and then you have Haley, who's just very smart, very nice and sweet. So it's like you get all these three women that are very different from each other, and you kind of throw them in there, and then you just have Nathan and Lucas, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, so Peyton, I think this is like really the heightened point of Peyton just being rude and bitchy. Like, there's a difference between being, broody, angsty, emo, whatever, and just being a bitch. Like, and after this episode, like, everybody, when the show was initially on, everybody, like, hated the character of Peyton so bad that after, I think it was episode 5, when they start telling her backstory about her mom and everything, they did that to give some likability to her because
Okay.
people hated her so much. And I think it was because you didn't really get, usually if somebody's like that, then they'll like turn around and show why. Or
Yeah.
like then they'll like, but every time she has like a conversation with Lucas or Haley or anything, I feel like she always just like is bitchy. Like he comes over to be like, "Are you okay? Like what's going on?" And she's like,
Yeah.
"I'm just a, riddle wrapped in a mystery inside a bitch." Like,
Yeah.
and
I
he's
feel
like, "Okay."
yeah. So it's really strange. I never got that bitchiness feel
Mhm.
of her. It just felt like somebody that was very misunderstood and didn't know how to portray the fact that she wants certain things out of life. Like, there's at one point that she's like, I don't need you advocating for my feelings, and I'm pretty sure I don't even need you. And it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, because you don't you don't know me, but at the same
Mhm.
time, like he wasn't doing it out of ill will, but she doesn't know anything else. Like
Mhm.
all she knows is the way Nathan was treating her. So at the same time, it's like I can see where her wall is being built, and it's like by the
Mhm.
relationships she had, and like Brooke is, I don't think she's a bad friend, but you can guess that since they're so different, she kind of has to put those walls up to be like, if I don't share your same interests, are we gonna still be cool? And I feel
Mhm.
like that's why when she saw Nathan and Haley, she kind of was like, oh, I need to tell her what
Mhm.
she's in for because she's not going to go through what I'm going through, you know?
Mhm. Well, and
So,
I think too, like again, like we even the good scenes that we get, especially with Peyton and Haley, because I feel like she is really nice to Haley and
yeah.
relates to her in a lot of ways. Like they like a lot of the same music and things like that. Um, but then she like ends it like she's like, "Oh, be careful," like whatever, blah blah blah. You
Yeah.
say a lot without saying a lot, without saying anything or whatever, and then she's like, "You're tutoring Nathan." Oh yeah, well he tells me everything. Like, okay, nobody was questioning that.
Yeah.
Also, like your relationship is trash. So like if you're trying to like showboat that like, oh yeah, he tells me everything, like
But
it's
it's
not working.
going
Like,
back to those insecurities and not knowing how to express them because
mm-hmm,
even when he comes back from crashing her car, she tries to confront him and he basically was like, well, you do know that I took it and you know it's a lie, but are
mm-hmm,
you coming back? And she's like, no, that's exactly
yeah,
not what I'm doing. So I'm pretty sure it feels like a lot of the insecurities that she has from her relationship, the backstory that we're going to get in the future,
mm-hmm,
it's making her the way she is. And it's good that they started, in my opinion, that backstory early because if I
mm-hmm,
feel like if that continued and you just don't know why she's the way she is, it would have
mm-hmm,
turned out worse. That maybe she would have been written off in an accident, like at the end of season one,
100%, one
instead of
hundred percent.
seeing that progression through all the seasons that we got of the
Mm-hmm,
character. And it's for situations like this, like, yeah, she is the way she is, but you start understanding as you go. But I don't think it would have been able to be pulled like and stretched a little longer because the
mm-hmm.
audience was not behind it.
Thank you guys for listening. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Catch you next time.
Go ahead, rewatch.